Okay. Welcome. It has just turned 7 p.m. Wednesday, the 21st of April. You are watching episode 3 of the Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap, providing an insight on issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to the regional residents. My name is Bill Bates. Joining me on this episode is my guest, Shaun Jackson, agronomist, horticulturalist with over 40 years' experience. Most importantly, he is an innovator and is passionate about land care. Welcome, Shaun.
G'day, Bill. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. Firstly, I really want to catch up. We had you on a podcast last year and you gave us a little bit of insight of your orange glow pumpkin and its development. But I've noticed a number of articles in the on the internet, and obviously it's off and running. Can you give us a bit of an update in regards to where you are now with the progress of your development?
Well, what I wanted to do is set the product up so we could grow it down south and keep, although summer is a much lower use of pumpkin, I wanted to have it grown down south, and we went to Gatton and the areas around Gatton to get it grown through summer after we finished. Unfortunately, we struggled to find growers who had water, and we actually had a couple of crops that ran out of water. Can you just tell us
exactly where Gatton is?
Gatton's about an hour and a half drive west of Brisbane.
Okay, so it's a long way from where you are now.
In what's called the Lockyer. Yeah, it's what's called the Lockyer Valley, the salad bowl of Brisbane.
Okay, right. So just let people know too. You're broadcasting now from Lakelands, basically 1,700 kilometres north of Brisbane. So that's the space between your pumpkins.
When people say where are you, I generally say it's where Australia gets pointy.
On the Cape.
And halfway up the Cape we are, pretty much, yes. So the idea was grow here in winter and then grow in the south in summer. But the really things conspired and the climate conspired. So our crops were quite poor and we had some issues through the summer. Plants in the ground here now, and we're going to begin harvest for winter in earnest in June. But we've had some really fantastic things happening in all of the major capital cities. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. We really haven't been able to focus on Melbourne, even though it's a great food site. We've been going to restaurants and we've been going to food service, and we've also got a great project going right now with DAF. I might have mentioned to you, and what they're doing is they're pulling the pumpkin apart. They're separating it out, looking at, we took the pumpkin and dried it. We took the seed out of it. So we dried the pumpkin for flour and have this amazing high protein, high beta carotene, really colorful powder that you can use in all sorts of things as a dried powder. And then they took the seed out and crushed the seed and made pumpkin seed oil. And the pumpkin seed oil has amazing levels of beneficial oils. And then the husk left from the seed then is 40% protein and 40% fiber. So we're looking at using the husk from the seed for muesli bars and a range of other things. So in essence, what I've always aimed to do with this pumpkin is have it thin skin, bright in color, great in flavor, easy to cut, easy to use for many things, but also make sure that we can market the entire crop.
Okay,
so the aim of this project.
I'll just take an opportunity to share a screen of the pumpkin, and you can just a bit of insight. On the screen, we've now got the pumpkin in the field, and it is definitely a nice bright yellow. And
you can see in that photo that even as you look in that photo, you can see the stems. When you ever look at normal pumpkins, most of the stems are dark green and the stem to the pumpkin itself is dark green. You can see there's so much beta carotene in both the plant and the pumpkin that you can see that leaf there on the right is even variegated because it's got so much yellow in it, it doesn't want to make chlorophyll, which makes it a little tricky to grow, but it is workable.
Okay, I'll just pull down, and there's a bit of a harvest and then cut open.
The aim of
it doesn't seem to have a lot of seeds.
yeah, no, that's a. I mean, when you buy a pumpkin, you know, so often one of my aims in producing this variety was that, or breeding this variety, is when you buy a pumpkin, most of it, they're 50% air. And I want, you know, they're difficult to cart home and difficult to get through the shopping system. So this is smaller but heavier. And when you buy it, you get all flesh, you don't get seed. So, of course, the downside is I don't have a lot of seed now that it turns out the seed's a fantastic product and it makes oil. But it was all about the pumpkin, right?
Well, now you have to change track. You have to make ones, especially with a lot of seeds in, so you can put them to another use.
Believe me, Bill, I'm working on
it. I'll just chuck up another screen here, and you can give a quick rundown of some of the benefits of the pumpkin. There's a general statement for it, so people can read it, but if you'd just like to go through a little bit of it.
Well, I didn't want to being a hands-on farmer and an agronomist, I didn't want to make any claims that weren't appropriate. So we've had a lot of work done by the National Measurement Institute and now with DAF. So we've had totally official people doing the comparisons, doing the analysis of the pumpkin to find out what it has and what it doesn't have. So all this information is real and true information on it from normal field conditions. So it's got 4 times the beta carotene, which is pro-retinal vitamin A, and that is really good for vision, good for skin, good for all those other sorts of things, and just so happens to be extremely good for the immune system. And it's something that your average Australian diet struggles to get enough of. And people take supplements for beta carotene, but supplements are not all that good for you, and the body can't handle them. So that when you take it naturally, because it's attached to fiber, then the body passes any excess above that. It's thin-skinned, so you do not peel it. You don't even think about the skin when you're roasting it. You don't even think about taking it off. You just eat it with the skin, and the skin's the same color as the flesh. So when I make a soup, all I do is cut it in half, scrape the seed out, chop it up, throw it in the pot. No, nothing goes to waste, especially since you can also take the seed out, put it on a roasting dish, put it in the oven at 200 for 10 minutes, and the roasted seeds honestly taste like popcorn.
It just reminds me, like some people have got, and I don't know why, they like Jarrahdale pumpkin. Now we've moved. I remember that and grey pumpkin as a kid, but we've come a long way from there. We graduated to butternut, and Kent, but for the life of me, can't see the sense in cutting the skin of a Jarrahdale or Queensland grey pumpkin, because unless you've got steel mittens on, there's a good chance you got to knife yourself.
Yes, that's right. That's right, and just the hassle of doing the skin when you're trying to make soup or process, it's a real nuisance, yeah.
But also half the product seems to be, on when you've cut the skin off anyway, because usually you've got the undercoat of the green as well, so you always take that off. So you're skinning a lot of the product away before you get what you're willing to eat.
Yeah, exactly. So we're also working with some of the processors and some of the other people because, again, it's about recovery. So I'm hoping that farmers can harvest their crop, have the very best of the fruit and the shape, and market that fresh market to the public. And then everything else will go to a processor. It can be munched up. We can get seed, we can get flour, we can get everything out of it. And then we can also hopefully make some really good health products out of it. We can add 5% of the pumpkin powder to a bun and suddenly turn a bun that wasn't good for you into being good for you.
Can you just tell us about something about the actual process in regards to obviously you don't do it at the farm yourself, but who do you supply it to sort of dry it and then turn it into this wonderful powder that can be marketed out there and who do we market?
Well, I'm probably saying too much too soon in some way, but we're right in the middle of that. We've had it done by the university. We've had it done by a guy who cut and dried it and did freeze dried, and then we've done it with another company in North Queensland that do work on green banana flour, and they had a different process to dry it. But the one we've done through DAF most recently has had us, to be honest, has had the best results because we've gently dried it. We haven't had a lot of heat in it, and then we've maintained very high levels of beta carotene in the powder. Whereas when you squeeze it, you squeeze the juice out, and a lot of the beta carotene's in the juice. And when you freeze dry it, that works okay, but it's a very expensive process. So we're actually not going to that commercially at this point in time. We're actually fiddling through the process to see what's the most efficient to recover the attributes of the product and get flour.
On that, can you give us an idea how the government's helped you in regards to the product?
How what, sorry?
How the government's helped you, or government bodies helped you with this product?
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, I've spent 11 years breeding it and starting from scratch, and I've probably spent, I hate to think how much I spent every year in marketing and traveling around the States and going to the stores and the restaurants, and we're still doing it. We've got websites and all sorts of things. So we're doing the bulk of the work for the fresh market, and no one's helped us with that. But the government would talk about innovation, and I see this as a really valuable innovation. Instead of digging holes in the ground and sending iron ore and other things overseas, if we're smart about it, Australia's a very careful and very sophisticated producer of vegetables and fruit, and we could produce this and create an industry that sends something like flour to Africa or other places that are in trouble. Instead of sending cash and only having 10% land, we could send flour. They can sprinkle it on their rice, and we can save lives internationally. In the meantime, we can have nicer coloured buns here and have, flour and muesli bars, and this will fit many, many different purposes.
Can you just tell the name of the organisation again that helped you? You gave the acronym.
The Department of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Fisheries?
In Queensland.
Fisheries?
Yes. No. It all got rolled into one. What was originally the Department of Ag, who used to come out and help farmers and visit farms, and then the government decided that was far too expensive to do. The farmers can help themselves. They decided what they'd rather do is sink them all back into an office and then have them make rules for the farmers to abide by, and then come out and check that we're abiding by the rules, right? So, but in the middle of that, there's some amazing departments, and the food sciences in DAF is really doing some amazing things. I'm so thankful of this grant, and the fact that I've dreamt about pulling this apart, and I've known it's got some amazing attributes, but to financially do it in the process of growing it, breeding it, making it happen, and doing the marketing is just financially nearly impossible. So this grant has really opened the doors for us to be able to get the opportunities to make some potentially really big markets. And that includes Japan, it includes aid, it includes fresh food processing, all these companies now. It includes, we can be involved in replacing meat in burgers and patties and things and healthy food. So it's a really exciting start. I couldn't do it without being able to pull it apart.
I mean, I like your idea of looking after the vegetables and vegetable growing, but take it easy on the beef growers, eh? We don't want to substitute all their meat with vegetable things. Actually, that was one of the big things in COVID. When some of the stuff disappeared from the shelf and mince was a bit short, and that was never a problem on the plant substitute food storage area. You could always guarantee you could go and get your veggie patty.
Yeah, it's a bit of a worry, isn't it? I know. Look, I don't make a judgment on any of that, but what I do say is, if the market is heading in one direction, then I'm happy to be there. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, the other thing in regards to it's wonderful when the government can come and do the right thing and sort of help you out in one direction. But I talking with cane growers and a lot of other people in agriculture, the government is more of a burden than a help. So it's good to see that occasionally we can get some benefit in regards to getting ahead. But
absolutely.
But sometimes I also wonder, it's like this carrot and the stick. They keep hitting you with the stick, but they'll throw you a few carrots like a grant or something like that. So maybe it would be better just to not have so much stick, and we could all make our own carrots, so to speak. We wouldn't be sort of always fighting to make a dollar because of the restrictions or the limitations that are on. We'd be much more liable to do our own research and our own payments. I mean, of course, you can't do big scale stuff, but just in general, in regards to your general productivity and just return on your investment.
It's been, people ask me about our risks and ask me about what our biggest problems are. And honestly, our biggest problems are government regulators, and whether that be the New Zealand DAF for us exporting to New Zealand, or whether it be the work health and safety people going overboard, or whether it be the food health people going overboard. I mean, here we are, we're way out in the sticks, and we want to have a little stand, and we want to be able to crush a bit of fruit, and we cut a little bit of fruit here. We don't cut fruit, we sell whole fruit, but we want to crush a little bit of fruit, maybe make some juice. And so the regulators come along and say, you need a sink, and then you need to do this, and you need to do that. And here we are, we've got 1,000 acres, and we've got a set of trees growing down the row, and I would be happy to have the sink run into the trees running down the row. But according to the government regulators, you've actually got to dig a sink pit, put gravel in there, put a tank in there, and actually show that you permeate it very slowly into the ground. You know, the problem is, and the problem, the root why you're where you are and why you talk about what you talk about, is we have city bureaucrats who never understand the reality of the business. I'm not sure how much is in the politicians' hands and how much is in the overpaid bureaucrats' hands. In the case of water, it's certainly the overpaid bureaucrats' hands, and it is stifling. It is absolutely stifling.
I think a lot of the problem too is, although these people, bureaucrats, are so-called experts in the field, they really don't have a lot of hands-on. And sometimes I think before they go and say, well, we want to bring in regulations and that, they need to go and live for 6 months out in regional areas. Like if they're talking about, especially one of my big rights is the Vegetation Management Act. I mean, if you've got those people who are sitting in Brisbane making up the rules, got them out of there, put them up on the Cape, and let them understand and see that regrowth and the problems it causes if you can't actually clear it. But not only does it suck goodness out of the ground, but it also stops, basically, because most of it's gum, it sort of inhibits the growth of grasses, which leads to erosion, and also adds to the general fire situation when the dry season. So we need to sort of get those people out of Brisbane and get them into the Cape, out near Cloncurry, and all those sort of things, or make them understand, well, this is the impact of your regulation. So what are you really trying to achieve?
Well, look at the people from Mareeba who were trying to tell us how we're going to farm and what we're going to farm, what fertilizer we're going to use. They decided to get out of their little ivory tower or their little cave in Mareeba and drive to Lakeland, and they were going to give us 1 hour. 1 hour. People, here's an industry here that's been slaving its ass off and producing food for people to eat and growing serious businesses worth in excess of millions of dollars. And these little I should be careful what I say. These little we're going to drive up here and give us 1 hour. And I just told them how insulting that was and how disgusted I was at their attitude. And that if they were, what I actually said was that it'd be a really dangerous situation for them to come out in the field and actually talk and hear common sense. because it might actually stress them out. Then they'll have to go home and take 2 weeks off work.
Oh, well, that's the thing. We probably just have to keep dealing with it, and it is hard. And I mean, if we go back to the Vegetation Management Act, when that was sort of moving through in 2017, I think there was a lot of interest or a lot of action by people like AgForce and Green Shirts and that to sort of bring it to attention. But it really got no traction. The government had already made up their mind. And it seems that the legislation that we got, if you went back to about 2015-16, you could have read draft legislation on the Australian Conservation Society's website. It's as though it's just passed what they dream up through the government to be imposed on you, rather than listening to actual growers and people out there on the land.
It's called the blame game, Bill, and the clear system. We got involved in it and said, how can you people possibly think this is fair and reasonable? And the government, the national government said, oh no, it's down, in our cases, it's down to the, it was down to the financial people within government. It was down to fair work about this 38-hour a week for our imported Tongans. Now you picture where we're in a situation where our Tongans come over here, they love it here. We look after them. We give them fantastic accommodation. We pay them an hourly rate. We're out at, the nice way to say is we're out the back of nowhere. There is nothing to do except work. It's all I do. It's all anyone does on the damn farm. There is nothing around here except work. And these guys turn up, they're here for 9 months and they want to work and they want to make money and they want to, and we pay them a very good wage, and I'm sure that they get paid every cent through their contractors. We look at their hours, we double check that they're getting paid. We are absolutely sure that. We shout them dinners, they have their own toilet and shower. We really look, and we enjoy them and we get along very well with them. But they want to work long hours. They want to work 50, 60 hours a week. What the hell are they here for? The more money they earn, the more they can go back. Now, these idiots in the city said, oh, you can only have them for 38 hours a week, or you've got to pay time and a half and double time. That would be perfectly okay if Woolworths and Coles would pay us time and a half and produce and a half and double produce, but they don't. They're down on our backs and we're on the ground with our noses in the ground, getting ground into the ground every opportunity they get. They were buying pumpkin at 50 cents a kilo and retailing at $2.49 for 50% of last year. Those numbers are there. And so here's the producer trying to do that. And here we are, we cannot afford to pay double time and time and a half. And these Tongans are getting paid 5 times more than they would be in Tonga. And they're very well looked after and they like us and they like working and they don't want to sit around doing nothing. But we have absolutely no choice. And if we have 10, sorry, this isn't what we do. But if some farmers have 10, they'll employ 15 and they'll put them on a rotation so they only keep them 38 hours a week and some poor buggers sitting there doing nothing. So who did these pricks in the city help?
Well, they've got, I think one of my favourite adages is, rules are for the guidance of wise men, right? And the blind obedience of fools. And I think the problem is we've got the fools writing them and then they want to make us obey the rules like we're fools. So there doesn't seem to be any leeway or common sense or mutual benefit. Like you would benefit and the workers would benefit, but that doesn't come into their equation. They've just got a set rule and that's it. And that seems to be a problem that we really need to get over.
Well, I've said it to you before, and I said it the last time we spoke. I mean, I was selling seed to farmers all over Australia, and I have seen a massive decline in number of farmers. And I get around and I talk to people, and this is my poke at it. I've been at it 6 years, and I can tell you that my wife and I are absolutely driven crazy, not by the farm. And we love the farm, we love the enjoyment, we love the business, but we're driven crazy by these people who think they know more than we do and enforce on us their rules and regulation, and they ruin this. They make it really tough for this business. And I can guarantee you, I can absolutely guarantee you that this country will get hungry because that many farmers will disappear and will lose the expertise, that it will ride from very low prices when it's overdone to extremely high prices never seen before, because it's down to, they've screwed small businesses out of business, and we're down to just a few big farmers. And when they make a mistake, that has a big influence on the throughput of produce.
Just in regards to the market itself, I mean, can't get over spuds being sort of $4,000 a tonne when you work it out in the shop price. When you know, all spud farmers were never getting much more than $200 a tonne. So we need to sort of have a look at the market itself in regards to the sort of control that Woolworths and Coles have. Is there some way we can sort of get a better position for growers and producers? I mean, we've seen it in the milk industry, where we've lost a lot of manufacturers and companies. And if anyone goes to Coles or Woolies now, where you used to have the cheese section, used to be about a good 2 arm spreads, you know, and you had Mainland, you had Bega, and you had Coon, and you had all these different. But now it's sort of shrunk to a very, very, you know, wouldn't be more than, you know, half a arm span sort of thing for what you've got the choice of. There's only a cheap brand, a premium brand, and Coles brand in a certain size range. I mean, of course, you get the other specialties in the small blocks of cheese, like Cracker Barrel and stuff like that. But it does seem like the range of cheeses and that has shrunk. And I've also noticed in a lot of other goods, the range has shrunk. Is that sort of something that the marketing people and especially Coles and Woolies are sort of instigating or planning?
The easiest people for Coles and Woolworths to buy off is a very big farmer who takes control of a large amount of their supply. Then the guy who's sitting in the office only has to make one phone call, not 300. He doesn't have to see 300 agents. So for him to go and convince some farmer to grow 60% of his watermelons, then his job becomes supposedly really easy. All the watermelons are in flow. They're all going to them. They know they're going. They know they can program it. But what he hasn't done, he hasn't gone in there, and what's happened is that the innovators and the smart farmers who do really good things and eat good produce and make good eating produce are getting pushed out, because in growing crops and growing vegetable crops, you can increase yield quite dramatically by using fertilizer. An example I'll give you is if you take the fat off the meat and just eat the fat off the meat, you'll look like a pretty big fella in a short period of time, but there's nothing underneath the fat layers over the top of you, right? If you eat the meat and you eat the vegetables and you're sinewy and you're strong and you're long lasting, it's exactly the same with fruit and vegetables. You can fertilize the hell out of them, water the hell out of them, blow them up. They have less flavor, they have less sugar, they have less tenacity, they have less firmness inside, but they're there and they're in the marketplace and the guy's got yield. So when they're being offered 60, 70, 80 cents a kilo for watermelon, then they can still make money. If I drop 15, 20% in yield, I make smaller fruit with a higher concentration of sugars, higher calcium, better flavor, and I drop my yield, it's very difficult for me to get the differential of price to have a quality product that people will enjoy eating. And that is one of the reasons you're getting, whether it be honey, whether it be peaches, whether it be the huge bananas you get these days that don't even go yellow before they're soft. All those things are based on the farmer just trying to make money when he's getting squeezed down to the bottom line.
Is that also why we've got strawberries as big as apples?
There's all sorts of different varieties, big and small things in different varieties. So varieties do come into it, but without question, to make yield, you have to blow things up. And if your price is low, then you have to make more yield to get a lower, to make the lesser margin pay the bill.
Has part of this has come about from I remember the days of the local grocery shop and that. I used to always go into either Footscray or in Perth, it was into West Perth Market and that, at 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and go and get their own fruit and that. And everything went in through the wholesalers. Do we need to come back and sort of, well, maybe sort of stop Coles and Woolworths dealing directly to the farmers and make everyone pull back into the wholesale system and make them go and buy from the wholesale system? Or is that detrimental, do you think?
Look, I've thought a lot about it, and we're very fortunate in that we get a lot of loyalty from the really good fruit shops around, you know, the Harris Farm Markets, the Tony and Mark's, the Fruit Sensations, the Spuds and Plums, and all those really good shops, and the shops, and you know, the really good fruit shops. They'll go down to the market and they wander around the market, and they know who's producing, they know the brands, and they know who's producing good fruit, and they know when. And they have the edge in being able to supply good eating product because they're in there tasting it, they're in the shop and they're talking to their customer, they're directly talking to their customer, or one of their close staff is, and they have that advantage. The supermarkets have to feed a lot more people, obviously, because unfortunately most of the lazy people in this country live on convenience, and they walk in there and buy a lesser product because, one, it's cheaper and they can get 5 things in the same place. But the independents have got to go around and they've got to actually source the product and taste it. And as I said, get an understanding of brands. The supermarkets set up with one very big grower and they set the seasonal supply program, and he goes and supplies them. And from that point on, they might be able to top up if he messes up from the markets from other people. But from that point on, they basically have to take his product. And I don't know how many of you have gone and seen what I've seen as the range of quality in stores, but I can tell you I've seen a lot more white fruit cut and a lot more cracked fruit and a lot more overripe fruit in the larger chains than I have in the independents as a quality issue. And it's easily understandable why, because of the way they purchase their product.
Most of it doesn't taste, hasn't it got a taste? I mean, that's one of the most noticeable thing about fruit, especially one thing noticeable is tomatoes. Like, I can remember as a kid, you know, I mean, you only had basically the old gourmet tomato, but it had taste. But today, unless you if you just buy it straight from Coles or Woolies, it's hard as a rock, and it's so firm, it's tough, hard to bite on, and then it's also got no real juice in it. It's a fairly dry sort of thing, and it's got absolutely no taste. It's sort of, I don't know, maybe people's expectation now is just so low. That's what that they'll be satisfied. That is that some problem? We've become just so tolerant of bad service and bad product. We just accept this sort of thing, and we're too lazy to go and look for something better, and unwilling to spend the extra few dollars.
It's really a complex issue, Bill. It's really hard to when from a person in produce and a person who worked in a seed company. I used to taste everything. I used to select varieties and taste everything by flavour before I'd introduce the variety, and it's not actually that hard to do, and it's certainly not hard to do by the independents, but it is by the supermarkets. The problem on tomato, I'll give you an amazing eating tomato, and I actually branded it and I called it Blast because it was like having a party in your mouth. You ate it and this burst of flavour had happened in your mouth. But the problem was that it was it was amazing eating tomato, and we dried the tomato as well and put it in a plate in front of several people, and we presented it once, and everyone's just going, that is amazing, that's fantastic. But you know that by the time we'd grown it, cut it and dried it, that tomato presented to Woolworths was higher than the wholesale cost they were buying it for. So we couldn't grow it as a whole product, and before even drying it or anything else, to get stuff they were getting from Turkey that didn't taste any good, but it was cheap. Now, I went into the supermarkets in those early days when I come up with this tomato. I went in there and I presented it to them, and I said, listen, I've got another tomato, and I won't say which supermarket, but the guy sat in front of me and said, do you know, Shaun, we have cherries, we have grapes, we have Romas, we have saladettes, we have this, we have that. We have so many tomatoes, so many species of tomatoes. There's no more room for tomatoes. I said, what about room for a tomato that actually eats well? And there was silence. And there was no room for a spectacular tomato that was spectacular in eating. It's like probably one of the best in the market at the moment is Perino. There's some other exceptions of people who grow a certain tomato, but it's that little oblong grape tomato. This tomato I had was a full-size tomato that tasted like a Perino. You get that beautiful after flavor in your mouth for 10 minutes after you've eaten it. And it didn't go anywhere because it was soft, relatively soft. And the public say, I want a firm tomato. Well, you're not going to get a firm tomato with the current genetics that's going to eat well. You needed to get a softer tomato and go and chop it up, be gentle with it, and enjoy the flavour.
No, we're faced
Not
with
as
a lot of
simple as
problems.
it appears.
And of course, the other thing is, I mean, all the especially Coles and Woolies, they're working on margins and those sort of things. And if it doesn't come within their profit margin or whatever, it's not going to get a Guernsey.
Well, and the real problem is, of course, it's about turnover and throughput, and that's what makes it. But the problem is that Coles and Woolworths have a mixer margin. They probably have an average margin. Well, I know they have an average margin, but what they do then is, at some point in time, like watermelon and pumpkin in the recent past has been very cheap, 50 to 70 cents a kilo. I mean, that's around sorghum prices people are getting for pumpkin or less for the last 2 years. And that's been retailing at $2.40. Well, when they do that, people aren't going to come in and buy heaps of it. But if they actually help the farmer and said, okay, we've got a flush coming on, the farmer will say, we've got lots of fruit coming on. Can we go in and go on special? For a start, how much lower than 50 cents can they go without throwing a check with every bin? But at 50 cents, if Coles and Woolies went out at $1, $1.10, big special, promote it, talk about making pumpkin soup and do other things, they shift the backlog and then things start to happen. But in actual fact, when you think about it, it's not to their advantage to shift the backlog because that's where the big margins come from.
Other things in regards to interfaces between government and Coles, Woolworths, and the other suppliers to the public is peak organisation. Like you've got Ag Force, sort of basically, I mean, Ag Force is trying to get in on everything at the moment. They're even trying to take over the cane growers. Are they sort of doing too much? Are they too now conglomerate and looking after too many different products? They can't give the right attention to each product to ensure that it gets marketed properly and negotiate or deal better between the government and the buyers like Coles and Woolworths on behalf of the producers.
They're so far from it, Bill. I mean, I should watch what I say, but they're so far from having a decent understanding of it. And you know, I dealt once when we were fiddling with one of them with a particular isolated product, with an exclusive product. And in 1 year, we had 5 category managers for that particular product. So we had one guy be there for a while, and then he get shifted off to this department or that department. Someone else would come in. And basically they knew some of them knew absolutely nothing. When, where, and how. You imagine the amount of experience, and that's why some of these other shops are kicking some goals. You imagine the amount of experience to know when the best stuff's coming from the right place and who's doing it and how they're doing it and when they're likely to change from one area to another and when they're likely to run into wet season and likely to get small supply. The experience to understand that and do it really well takes years. These guys are never allowed to get anywhere near that. They do it from a totally corporate point of view, just like a bunch of accountants looking at the numbers. Anything else they say, that's crap.
I have been into Ag Force down in Brisbane, had a bit of a yak to them a couple of times and sort of try to get an idea of what they do. And especially it was around the same time as Vegetation Management Act that was happening in 2017. And my question to them when I went down there, the discussion basically was, well, you've known this regulation's been on the books for a while. prior to 17, the Labor government didn't have a majority, so it was put on the back burner. But you always knew it was coming. But when Labor got in government in the 2017 election, well, then the legislation was coming through, and that's when Ag Force and producers and that mounted their Fair Laws for Farmer campaign. Now, what I suggested to them, that they were far too late. It's a done deal. You should have been doing this before the election in early in 2017, before the election, and pushing it to sort of, protect the people you're supposedly the peak body of. It didn't sort of go down well. But then further discussion, I really found that what I was talking to was people with communications degrees and skills.
Yeah.
Not farming. What I got out of it was their skill set and how they saw it was they're there to interface with the government and basically get the best outcome from what is going to happen. So rather than sort of just putting up the fight for stop these poor laws coming in, what they measured some of their success was how much they got in grants or mitigation costs from the legislation that came in. So they held their sort of success in regards to if they managed to get some grant that would be help in bringing in sort of mitigating some of the impact of the legislation rather than stopping the legislation. So it seemed like a too comfortable relationship between people in peak bodies who are in Brisbane, right next to George Street, basically, and people who have basically born and bred in the southeast in city environments, into university in an urban environment, and then supposedly looking after the interests of growers and farmers thousands of kilometres removed. And one of the conversations I did have is, well, why isn't, especially cane growers and Ag Force and that, located in sort of Mackay for sugar or something like that, and in Emerald for cattle people, and in Rockhampton for farmers or something like that? Why aren't these peak bodies more in contact with their membership rather than in contact with the bureaucrats in Brisbane?
I can't tell you how disappointed I am in the National Farmers Federation. And I wrote recently to Queensland fruit and veggie growers, and they sent a form around, and I did a survey back to them. And of course, I never heard from the survey. And basically, I said pretty much what you were just saying now. I said, firstly, all you people do is wait for the government to come up with the rules and then tell us how to deal with the rules the government's come up with. Although they make some noises about what they don't like, they don't do anything other than make some noises. We need some hungry, hard, militant people to get in there and fight for us like the French do. We need people actually that go in and say, we do this produce industry, the growers in this country, honestly, I mean, I'm looking from the outside in. I've been in it 6 years. It is a prick of a business at times. I can say it's an extremely hard business, and it is hard work. It's uncomfortable. It's dirty. It's wet. It's all of those things. It's also rewarding until you start to realise that you count for nothing, and you have these people come from these sorts of bodies, and they come here and they're really confident that they're arrogant. They think they're really good because they have an argument with you about what they were taught at university by the socialists about how we should all share in this and look after that and do the rest. And they have absolutely no idea, and they don't care. They think they're better, and they think we're a bunch of sodbusters that have to be managed. That's their attitude.
I think the other thing is book learning is more important than practical experience to them. Their theories, their models count for everything. But I vaguely remember, I'm not sure if you have any recollection, but I remember about maybe 15, 20 years ago, there was a guy in New South Wales who was trying to show people in agricultural world, if you hold water on your property and sort of make sure it doesn't cause erosion, slow down its progress across the landscape, and sort of create little eco environments within that land flow and the water flow. How much benefit it gives to not just that landholder, the whole environment, and also it sort of proved that holding back the water wasn't actually a great detriment to flow out for the river for other people. And I wish I could actually find something about that here. I used to be on Landline, something like that, on Channel 2 fairly regularly. So I just love to get. I also remember we also had Bill Burrows for here in Queensland, sort of trying to stress the importance of being practical in regards to having been on the ground and have real time and real groundwork, rather than sort of coming up with these issues in regards to what your theory is.
You know, applied science is not, it virtually doesn't exist. The sciences work with the sciences, and then occasionally someone pulls something useful out of it. I mean, a perfect example is the PCR tests they're using for the COVID-19. I mean that's a science that should never have been applied, and it's inaccurate, as it is for the vegetable industry. I mean, we lost our exports to New Zealand 2 years ago because PCR tests are inherently inaccurate, whether they work for plant diseases or whether they work for human diseases.
Can you just break up that acronym? Can you just break up that acronym for our audience? PCR, can you just break that up to what it actually stands for?
A PCR test is in essence, it's looking at it's looking at very small fragments of information, and then what they do is that they isolate RNA, and they isolate a piece of RNA, and then they use the PCR to basically blow that RNA up so that they can then determine whether it is a COVID, or whether in the case of the vegetables, whether it was CGGMV. Now, there's been a whole lot of issues with accuracy of that test, because when you blow it up, if you blow it up a small number of times, you don't get a good enough reading. If you blow it up too many times, you're guaranteed to get a positive reading. And so depending on the size of the particles, it's inherently inaccurate. And even the person who designed the test has agreed that it's inherently accurate. And we lost an export to New Zealand over exactly that issue. Those products that were PCR tested, told us that they had a problem, came back here, were tested by the Australian laboratories and never had a problem, but we still lost the export. So you don't win by being right, but what happens is that the sciences aren't applied to reality and common sense, because if they were, it wouldn't be people that go from high school to university to labs to be doing that. Those people would be out in the paddock, as you described.
If we can just move on to land care now. You're in a fairly sensitive, although fertile, it's still a very sensitive area in regards to it can have a high rainfall, so therefore you can have erosion and runoff and all those sort of things. So things like irrigation would be important, plus controlled pesticides or measurements of pesticides. Can you give us a bit of background in regards to your methods in regards to land care?
I wanted to, these red soils are really tricky soils, but it's sometimes sandy loams and heavy dark soils are easier than red soils. Red soils are quite tricky, and they turn to concrete, and they have a lot of things that make them red that cause inherent problems. So up here, because of the heat and the rainfall, the problem's really partly related to organic carbon and partly related to balance of nutrients. So what we wanted to do, and I'm involved in a probiotic company called Multicraft, and what we wanted to do was to be able to feed live bacteria and complex of bacteria into our soils to get them alive. We want to treat them very gently with low levels of nitrogen, and we want to balance the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and then look at all the other micronutrients, and we put it in balance. And then we irrigate with what's called a drip irrigation system, a trickle irrigation system. And the way we do that is we have a computer controlled system that wasn't cheap, but what that allows us to do is open and shut valves at our whim. So what we do up here is what's called pulse irrigating. We fertilize our beds. We have what's called a permanent bed system. In other words, that area that we grow the plants is the same area year in, year out. So we work on that area and apply our organic carbons and our zeolites and our probiotics and make this beautiful little patch of soil, which is, 50 centimeters by 1 meter that you predominantly grow the crop in. And what we do is we irrigate and grow and improve that piece of soil. And when we pulse irrigate, we irrigate for a period of time. It might be 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes. We move to the next block, and then we come back again to that block for a second irrigation. And that allows us to keep the moisture and oxygen in the root zone. Leach, no fertilizer. Use all the fertilizer that we've applied and keep it to the plant instead of letting it wash down under the root zone or down into the ground. So we take that very seriously, and I can describe to you that we have a block that we expanded, and we've been growing on it for 2 years, and we expanded up the other end of that block. And so we ran the trickle and irrigation and everything through both the existing block that was 2 years old and then up to this area of new land, which was nearly 50%, but not quite. So the rows went from 400 metres to close to 700 metres. And I can tell you the stuff that grew crop for 2 years was 50% better in first grade fruit, less cracks, better flavour, the plants were better, and we got less disease than the new land because we are making our land better. We're improving the carbon, we're improving the nutrient balance, we're improving the aeration. We're not turning it over and pounding it, and it's really quite rewarding when you see the reality of that come to fruition.
I think another thing, there's a lot of concern about things like runoffs from pesticides and fertilizers. But my brother-in-law's involved in turf farming in Western Australia. Now, that is something that needs heaps of water. I mean, on the day they put the sod in and turn it into the ground, irrigators are on day and night sort of thing, just about to get it started. And one thing about Perth soils around Perth is it's sand, and it just leaches through. So one of the big problems, especially one of the farms we were up in Bullsbrook, it sits over the Perth Artesian Basin. So one of the critical things, and fertilizers are just one of those things you just need, along with a lot of water with grass.
Sure.
But the most recent development is now this nano fertilizers or nanotechnology that's been put into both pesticides and fertilizers. And now that they can actually put these fertilizers in, and there's almost no leaching because it's so good in regards to the application can be so small that the plant uses it long before it's got to get leached away. So those sort of innovations, how do you keep across all the different innovations, and especially knowing the government's always got to come out with a stick somewhere and try to change regulations to make it harder for you, especially in these sort of areas? How do you keep ahead of the game?
Yeah, look, there's a fair bit of reading and a fair bit of information. There's also some logic, and I have some real key players in the industry because I'm lucky enough to have been in the depths of the industry and going around field days as a seedsman, agronomist, and as a researcher. That I've got a lot of contacts all over the world and all over Australia who are up with it, and I talk to them constantly about it. Most of our industry, again, due to cost restraints, do what they did last year and the year before and the year before that. Very few of us risk innovation because there is some risk in it and it takes time to do. I'll give you an example of what we do. You talk about pesticides, and when you get your soil health in good shape and you can push your hand down to your wrist in the soil because it's so loose, and you can feel the warmth and the roots, and you've got air in there, and you've got your fertilizer balance, and you've got your probiotics, and you go along there and you've got this really healthy plants. We in our early few years, we didn't do that. We had powdery mildew wiped us out, block after block. Insects were a big issue coming in, and we had red spider mite, and then we had aphids, and then we had whitefly, and there was this horrible roll of apply chemical and spray this week and spray next day and spray next day and so on. I got off the roundabout. We started to make, this was in our first 2 years. The second year, we started to make more probiotics, started to turn the soil over less, started to do compost, started to do zeolite, started to do all these other things, and then brought in bugs for bugs. And I can tell you this last year on this farm, the only insecticide we sprayed was one soft insecticide called Bacillus thuringiae, or which is called Dipel. And it doesn't kill anything. It's very soft. And we have got all of we constantly think about our climate, our changes, when our bugs are coming in and what they're doing. We keep our plants healthy. We don't make them soft. We keep them low in nitrogen and high in all the other elements and micronutrients. And we also feed them with some of these probiotics that help them resist bugs. And I can tell you, our mildew is down to 50% to 60% less. And our chemical use for insecticide has completely and utterly dropped, except we do bugs for bugs and we do 10-day sprays of BT to keep grubs out. And that is it. And I'm talking about growing, nearly, we're in the top 5% of watermelon growers in the country. So I'm not messing around.
But I suppose you don't really get any accolades from the people who sort of write the regulations in regards to how you improve things. They don't seem to take that into account in regards to the consideration of what your needs and that are for the future. Is there any one thing in particular you'd like to see the people who are setting these rules change to make your life and your farm up there more productive?
I'm probably not a very good, I'm not a very tolerant person about most of those sort of things. And when I hear these uni students, I'm not very accommodating to them. We want reef wires that talked about coming up here and wanting to do this and wanting to do that. I am absolutely, totally within, way under anything they're ever going to find. There is no runoff off this place. There is no issue. They're never going to find it. But I don't want the nosy bastards on my property, and I don't want them coming out here, and I don't need their regulation. I don't need their bullshit. Neither do most of the farmers up here. We're doing a really good job of what we're doing, better than they would ever do if they were in our shoes. And so I'm not entertaining them. In fact, if I could legally, I'd lock the gate and keep them out. Not because I'm worried about doing the wrong thing, because I just cannot stand that sort of arrogant, stupid attitude of these people turning up telling me what to do. Or trying to tell me what to do. I don't want them knowing what I'm doing either, by the way.
Just on a normal topic, I mean, we've just had a major rain event in Cairns. So, I mean, we've had nearly 600 mils in 3 days. Especially your area, and especially up the Cape, can have massive occasions where there's major rainfalls. And then by the same token, you can go through periods where, gee whiz, I wouldn't mind a drop of rain at the moment. Do you face that situation often, or is it an annual thing, or is it just maybe every couple of years there's a real dry spell, or that is a setback that you really need some way to address?
It's a bit hard to know. I mean, we've only been here 6 years, and in the 6 years we've been here, 1 year we ran out of water in our bore right at the end, and it was a bit of a disaster. Mostly the bore's been okay. I mean, I wanted to build another dam on our own property, and of course, as I said to you at our last meeting, the water resources in Mareeba told me that the only way I can build a dam is to spend what turned out to be $200,000 to talk to the Aboriginals and buy the water that they don't use that falls on Cape York, and buy rights off them, and then maybe I could dig a dam and increase my water rights. By the way, this is off water that falls on my property and runs along my property to be caught by my dam if I was allowed to build it. So I can grow crops to feed people. So the answer to your question is, I threw that in, but the answer to your question is, over the 6 years we've been here, we've had a range of those sort of things. The hardest part we have, which is where we are right now, is trying to get back on the land and get prepared to get crops in March to be able to harvest in June, because March is often very wet. So we planted plastic. We put plastic down last year. We sowed sorghum all around the plastic. So the sorghum held the soil together all around the plastic, and we let the sorghum get to a certain height and it holds the plastic and the soil in place. We also had a farm full of rocks, and it's cost a fortune, and it still is, to get rocks out. And we've strategically put rocks all around the edges of the farm on the low spots, so we don't get any soil runoff in our property. It collects in the rocks and builds up, and then we can get it back on the ground if we need to. And I can't afford to laser level it because 90% of our season's dry. So I mean, so we don't do that, but we would expect rain to finish in March and not start till December. That December to March rainfall is all we have to be able to run us for the year. From that point on, normally it's zero, and we expect zero for that time.
So you really want storage for this cushion when you need it.
Exactly. But according to the bureaucrats, then I'm stopping runoff. I've told you, I went down the paddock and took some photos and sent it to them of a 30 foot wide, 4 foot deep flow after my little dam caught the rain running out the back for 2 weeks. That would have filled 50 dams and still filled them up and then ran off as it was, right?
Just on that, in regards to property owners' rights in Australia, like in the United States, I understand with their what's under the ground is the property owners as well. They can sort of is there's oil or gas or something, they can benefit from what's under the ground. Australia, basically, if you've got something under the ground that someone else wants, your farm's in jeopardy, and you basically get no benefit. In regards to rain, is it commonplace all around the world, or is it fairly unique to Australia in regards to that you don't own any of the rain that falls on your property, and you're sort of restricted in harvesting? Is that unique to Australia, or is that commonplace?
Funny, actually, now that you've said that, I'll need to email some of my friends and some people I know and ask them. But I mean, most of the world grows in dry areas and irrigates. So most of the world, whether it's Mexico, whether it's California, whether it's most of those really big producers, they're actually not taking rainwater anyway. Their governments, instead of spending money on the dribble that this lot has spent money on, their government's actually spent money on putting infrastructure to be able to feed agriculture so that America could be one of the biggest horticultural exporters in the world. This bunch of idiots want to help BHP and Rio dig holes in the ground and send minerals away that will never be replaced. I suppose that's the difference.
I suppose the other thing is, I mean, it really is a testament to poor government or short-term thinking in regards to so much water falls in Northern Australia, but it hasn't got the infrastructure to capture it and sort of send it south or send it where it's needed. And I was only reading a couple of months ago, because I was talk about the Bradford scheme and all those sort of things and the cost of that. And I went back and had a look at the Kalgoorlie pipeline that was built in the 1890s, and sort of got a bit of an idea of the scope and the cost for that. Now, a fledgling colonial government, it only had its parliament granted to it in about 1890. Before that, it was basically administered by a governor, and the parliament didn't really have much say. So it became a self-administering colony, and the premier was John Forrest, and he convinced the parliament and the people of this fledgling colony that only had about 50,000 people to borrow 2.5 million pounds in the day. That equates to $40 billion today. Imagine having only a fledgling colony and you're putting yourself in debt for equivalent to $40 billion on the idea of building this yet to be proven scheme to feed water from Perth to Kalgoorlie, because Kalgoorlie was the big production hub, gold bringing in a lot of riches to the colony. And it required the building of 2 dams and a 500-kilometre distribution line and pump station. Now, that was a great risk. And today, we've got much better engineering and mechanisation and things like that. But you would never get even a Commonwealth government that's raking in hundreds of billions of dollars in tax to stump up money for a major project like that anymore. That's the sort of infrastructure we really need if we want to go ahead, and we probably won't see it. But in the meantime, you would think they'd at least allow property owners to dig a hole. And I'll just put a share up here. Where is that? There's a picture of some of your workers. Now, basically, a lot of farm dams are just a hole in the ground, especially if it's flat, and sometimes they can take advantage of the natural contours. So really, it strikes me, if the government's not willing to stump up good money for major projects that give us great infrastructure, I see it as sort of hypocritical for them not at least to let landowners capture a percentage of the water and hold it on their own land to further the development of Australia.
It's beyond concept, and I had a very long conversation with this idiot from the water resources in Mareeba, Dr. someone or other, I can't remember his name, is that forgettable. And I, at the end of the conversation, when he told me the only way to get water was to buy it off the Aboriginals and that he'd fix my problem for me, at the end of the conversation, I warned him. I said to him, that when you people will know when you've gone too far, because your grandchildren will get hungry.
The other thing is, what that just boils down is a transfer of wealth. It's not even constructive for the community or the nation to transfer wealth like that. So you would just wonder where they come up with these ideas. I think we're probably going to get ourselves in the trouble if we keep pursuing this line. It's gone past 8 o'clock, so we'll wrap it up here, Shaun. And if you've got any other things you want to speak on before we go.
No, that's good, Bill. I mean, I do want to say, I do certainly want to make sure you understand that this business is a vibrant, really interesting business, and we have amazing opportunities from Japan and amazing opportunities to grow. We're in a hell of a salad bowl, and with some help, and I'm not asking for people's money, I'm not asking for the damn government's money, I'm just asking them to leave us alone and get us into it. We could develop a massive business up here, which would be helping our balance of trades and exporting, employing a whole lot of people, developing in the north, if they would just let me get on with it. That's all I have to do.
I think that sort of boils down to the government sort of gets far too involved rather than just setting up the broad framework and allows people to do their best. It just comes too restrictive. So I think that's the problem, and the focus that's got to be there. We've got to wake the government up. Look, yeah, there's the frameworks there. You've got to be there, but you don't have to micromanage industries or people. They and the market will take care of that. You set up the framework and make sure the public infrastructure is there so that they can take the most advantage of the opportunities as it presents them. So I think that's what we really need, the government to sort of wake up to that sort of concept rather than try to micromanage everyone's life.
I think the bureaucrats are too entrenched and enjoying the power too much.
Agreed. And the other problem that's occurring too, I suppose, especially if you look at federal system, we're now getting 3rd, 4th and 5th generation public servants born in Canberra in the ATC, the school in the ATC, their university degrees in the ATC, maybe got a little bit of experience going around the world and having a bit on the little joints, but come back and go into the family business in the public service. And so you get this whole mindset. So maybe somewhere along the line, what we need to do is actually get a lot of departments and those sort of people in the bureaucracy out thousands of miles away from Canberra. Yes, have their head office, but the people who are making decisions or getting information to base decisions need to be located in other regions, especially regions that they're dealing with, especially in agriculture. They need to be somewhere out on the dry plains outside Richmond and that, to get some concept of what's needed as framework to let those cattle producers produce their best and go forge ahead. So that's my little beef about the bureaucrats. And like I say, it's become a family business for so many of them now, multi-generational. So it's a bit scary. I don't know how we're going to. I don't know how we're going to dig them out of there.
Sheltered workshop.
True. Okay. On that note, we'll wrap it up. And look, Shaun, I want to thank you again for coming on this evening. I know you've got a busy schedule, and the technology sometimes is a bit frustrating, but we got there in the end. So if you can just stay on the line, I'll just wind it up now, and I'll come back to you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good night, Shaun. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That's the end of the show. Next week, we will be back. Next week, we're looking to have an advocate for producers on. So that's in negotiation at the moment. So we'll have a bit of insight for the people who are actually on the ground and fighting for the interest of people in agriculture in particular. If you enjoyed the show, please like and share and friend the broadcast. And if you're watching it on YouTube, please subscribe and like. This is Bill Bates signing off until next week. Thanks very much.